Johnny was 12, and he thought of himself as a man the way some young boys do. Pa had sent him all the way to the end of the property, up and over the hill, down through the fields, all the way to the ancient apple tree that was right at the edge of the property where it butted up against the thick, dark woods. He told him, "You don't come back until you have filled this burlap sack with windfall apples." Johnny had done it before, and so he set out to do it again. That ancient apple tree was deserted. He hardly ever saw any animals even, maybe a hoof print from a deer here and there, but never any people. So he was walking on down the long path, and he looked ahead under the apple tree, and he thought he saw something white. Not a girl in a white dress, maybe a deer, a white deer. Now Johnny, he didn't hunt, and he didn't ever want to hunt like the older boys did. And when he thought he saw that white deer, he thought, oh, I won't even tell the other boys about a white deer, if that's what I saw. And he bent down to pick up the burlap sack, but it was gone. He looked around, and that's when he saw her. A girl about his age, long, dark brown hair falling in her face, and she was picking up apples and putting them in his burlap sack. "What are you doing?" "I'm picking up apples." Duh. "Well, yeah, but who are you?" Well, then she cut him a smile, and she looked up at him with these deep, dark brown eyes, meeting Johnny's hazel ones. "Who wants to know?" "I'm Johnny." "I'm Desi." And they worked together and filled up that sack with windfall apples. And while they did, they talked and they got to know each other. And when the bag was full, Johnny was tying it up and putting it over his shoulder, thinking he would invite Desi back to his house for dinner. And when he looked around, she was gone. He thought he saw a white tail of a deer and a rustle through the woods. Pa said when he got home, "There shouldn't be a kid out there. You find out where her people are." The next week when Johnny went out, he asked Desi about her folks. He said, "Pa says nobody lives in the woods over there." Desi said, "Well, tell that to my kinfolk." And she laughed. That was the last time Johnny asked her anything about her family, but they kept meeting and filling up sacks of apples, and all through the fall and all through the winter. In the spring and the summer, Johnny had other things to do, but the next fall when he was back, Desi was there waiting for him. And they continued like that, meeting once a week, filling up bags of apples. Sometimes Desi would bring one for her family too, until the year that Johnny's mom got sick. He had a lot more to do inside that year, and he didn't get down to the apple tree. But he looked out on the porch one Sunday morning. There was a big burlap sack full of apples. And another one arrived every week until his mom was gone. The next time Johnny went way down to the edge of the property where that apple tree was and Desi was waiting, he convinced her to come back to town with him. And they walked all over town. Everybody that saw them, they just seemed to grin themselves to see two young people enjoying themselves so much. Mrs. Brown, the postmistress, Mr. Smith, who had the appliance store, the owner of the radio station, they all were happier for seeing those young people. And Johnny's pa, he was working in the munitions factory to help out with the war in Europe. And the terrible day came that exploded with Johnny's pa inside. Johnny was 17. He signed up that day, enlisted. Desi couldn't believe it. "You're not a killer. My mom said I should stay away from men because they're all killers at heart, but you're not a killer." And Johnny said, "Sometimes it's the only way to stand up for what's right." and they fought, and Desi took off. And Johnny, he never felt so alone. He went back around town to all the places they had been going to together, and his heart was so empty. He stood outside of Smith's appliance store, and the radio was on. And that song came on. Now he'd heard it said that a poet said you could see the world in a grain of sand, but he could hear his world in that three-part harmony. He rushed down to the record store, he bought that record, he hurried on home, and he grabbed the big old gramophone and he clunked it all the way down to the ancient apple tree. And he put that song on and played it, and out of the woods came Desi. And they danced together to that song all night long, even after the gramophone had stopped playing. But the next morning, Johnny shipped out. Desi, she woke up and she was so cold. Johnny was gone and her heart was empty. Her mama had told her to stay away from men, that they're all killers at heart. She figured it was because she had met Johnny when he was still a child, and by the time his mom had died, he was already hers in her heart. He wasn't a killer. He could be one of them. She was sure of it. Ma said no. Men don't believe in magic or enchantment or our kind. But Desi had believed he could, till he signed up to kill other men. But then, when he brought that contraption down to the apple tree, and she heard the enchantment and music that came out of it, she heard their hearts. She heard their lives. She heard his promise to come marching home to her. And then he was gone. Now Johnny had no way to write to Desi, no address for her people. So he sent letters home to the postmistress. And every once in a while she'd send him one back saying they were picked up. Johnny saw some things in war, did some things in war. It made him think that maybe Desi's mom was right. But he swore that when he got home, he would never leave her again. And he would never kill again. And that was the thought on his mind when his plane was shot down over Frankfurt. Mrs. Brown, she caught the directions that that weird boy had left for her. And she walked all the way down to the end of the property, to that ancient apple tree. And she tacked the telegram on to the trunk. The government regrets, missing in action, presumed dead. She shook her head. Who was ever going to see that out here? All she saw on the ground were some hoof prints, a doe, and her fawn, maybe. She went back into town, and another human never came down that path till a year later, when a shadow of a man walking with a cane came all the way down that path over the field to the ancient apple tree and sat down. He sang with what was left of his voice. Don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me. Anyone else but me. And out of the woods came a white doe and her yearling. They laid their heads in his lap. And somehow Johnny wasn't surprised when the transformation occurred, and he was holding Desi in his arms. You came home. I will never leave you again. But what's this? That's Lily. And as the two of them looked down at that yearling, the air shimmered, and there was a little girl with blonde hair and hazel eyes like Jack's own. She threw her chubby little arms around him and said, Papa. Well, Johnny and Desi, they built a cottage underneath of that apple tree, and they lived with their family for the rest of their lives. And Johnny kept his promise, he never did kill again. But long after that cottage fell down, Lily would gather the fawns together and tell the story of her parents and her papa, who was a man, but who was not a killer at heart. Don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me till I